Dross. Useless material. Waste. The factory's inefficient production methods create a lot of dross that has to be thrown away. Wizened. Shriveled. Withered. The marathon runner's face, wizened by so much time spent in the sunlight, didn't look good on film. Infelicitous. 1. Unlucky, unfortunate, or unhappy. 2. Inappropriate. It was infelicitous that I forgot my bike helmet that day since I got hit by a truck. Valedictory. Of or pertaining to a situation of leave-taking or ending. The boss gave a valedictory speech because she is retiring tomorrow. Filiation. 1. The relation of a parent to a child. 2. Derivation. Since they both had skinny noses and buck teeth, the filiation between the boy and his father was hard to disguise. Abstruse. Difficult to comprehend or understand. Recondite. My mom says that I should be getting an A in algebra since it's not exactly an abstruse subject. Impuissance. Weak, feeble, without power. The old man's impuissance was depressing. He couldn't even open the door for himself. Sanguine. Positive, hopeful, cheerful. Despite the past successes, the team is less sanguine about their chances of winning a championship this year because of the injuries to key players. Internecine. 1. Mutually destructive. 2. Related to conflict within a group. Cold War nuclear strategy consisted of an internecine policy whereby one missile launch would automatically trigger a global nuclear war. Aegis. Protection, sponsorship, support. As long as she works under the aegis of the CIA, she can do whatever she likes. Vouchsafe. To allow or permit, as of a favor granted. The king vouchsafed the man's release from prison as an act of mercy. Malapropism. Misusing similar-sounding words in a ridiculous way. One famous malapropism says, "He's a wolf in cheap clothing." Implacable. Impossible to please or satisfy. If she doesn't get enough sleep, my baby sister is implacable. No toys or treats will make her happy. Dissimulate. To conceal one's thoughts or feelings. The man, scared of revealing his true emotions about the breakup, dissimulated as best he could, smiling when he really wanted to cry. Gamble. To play or frolic. High on sugar and caffeine, the kids gambled excitedly on the jungle gym. Numismatics. The study or collection of coins or metals. My nerdy uncle is into numismatics, so his house is filled with weird old coins. Macerate. To soften food or another substance by soaking it in liquid. Since my grandma doesn't wear her false teeth anymore, we have to macerate her food. Paramour. A lover, especially a secret one. The murdered man's wife caught him sending love letters to his paramour. Timorous. Fearful, timid. The dog is timorous around people because his last owners abused him. Rend. To tear apart, to break into pieces. My manager is so disgusted with the contract, he says he is going to rend it into tiny little bits. Shoal. A shallow area in a body of water. The drunken captain got the boat stuck in the river shoals. Insularity. The state of being isolated, detached, solitary. My sweet mate's insularity is out of control. She never talks to me and she won't leave her room if I'm home. Panoply. A complete collection or wide range of things. The vendors at the flea market have a panoply of stuff for sale, from egg beaters to wireless cards. Fae. Otherworldly, mysterious, strange. Because of her mind-reading abilities and her love of moonlight walks, the girl's family described her as Fae. Pillory. To publicly mock or abuse. The politician was pilloried in the press for his offensive remarks. Equipoise. Equilibrium. An equal balance of forces, interests, weight, etc. The two teams' skills were perfectly equipoise, so the game was a stalemate. Ineffable. Inexpressible. Unspeakable, or indescribable. In the end, most philosophers agree that the nature of beauty is ineffable. Any attempt to analyze it or quantify it will inevitably fail. Patois. The dialect of a region. Since the boy was raised in a remote town, no one in the city understood the patois he spoke in. Inveigh. To protest strongly or verbally attack. Many officials inveighed against the new immigration rules, which they felt were blatantly racist. Excuviate. To shed, molt, or cast off. Birds routinely excuviate their feathers, just as snakes do their skin. Propitiatory. Conciliatory, serving to appease or make favorable to. The children cleaned the house in a propitiatory gesture, since their mother was still angry with them. Apoplexy. 1. A fit of extreme anger. 2. A stroke. Finding graffiti on his store windows puts the owner into a state of apoplexy. Natty. Neat in dress and appearance. The soldier showed up to his graduation in a natty dress uniform, complete with shiny, polished shoes on his feet and well-ironed creases in his pants. Innumerable. Countable. The causes of the fire were innumerable. The investigation listed 5 main ones. Lugubrious. Sad, gloomy, dismal. On a night as wet and miserable as this one, the train whistles sound downright lugubrious, like the trains are crying. Emaciation. Unhealthy thinness, as from starvation or sickness. After a week without food, the climber was in a state of desperate emaciation. Fulsome. Excessively flattering or complimentary. The applicant's fulsome praise made the manager feel that he was trying too hard to get the job. Calumniate. To slander, make false statements about. The tabloids frequently calumniate celebrities and are often sued as a result. Comedy. Civility, mutual respect. Despite their bitter historic feuds, the two countries have recently displayed an admirable comedy. Lilliputian. Very small. Your size 3 feet look Lilliputian next to Shaq's size 22 sneakers. Compunction. Regret. Remorse over wrongdoing. The woman felt no compunction over having shot the man because she believed that her life had been in danger. Sophistry. False, deceptive arguments. The Senate bill is so outrageous that no amount of sophistry will get it to pass. Refractory. Stubbornly disobedient, impossible to manage. Mules are refractory animals. No amount of punishment or coaxing can get them to do something they don't want to do. Manumit. To release from slavery or servitude. Abraham Lincoln is widely admired for having manumitted America's slaves. Fulminate. 1. To denounce or protest vehemently. 2. To explode violently. All of the speakers at the vegan rally fulminated against the meat industry, shouting angry slogans and making threats. Abnegate. 1. To renounce, reject. 2. To relinquish, to give up. The general abnegated his responsibilities over the troops because he had grown ethically opposed to the war. Adduce. To cite as evidence or proof in an argument. My little sister was right to think that if she adduced the hairless cat, my parents would believe that I had shaved it. Bifurcate. To separate or divide into 2 branches. The river is bifurcated by a small island. Desultory. 1. Aimless, erratic. 2. Without energy or purpose. The girl's attempts to find a job have been desultory. She sends out emails replying to whatever job postings she happens to run across. Solipsism. the philosophical belief that only the self exists. Her selfishness is so extreme that it borders on solipsism. Her actions show no regard for anyone outside of herself. Refulgent. Shining. When the sunlight strikes them, the diamonds are refulgent, almost blinding. Scurrilous. Vulgar or abusive. The scurrilous story was a hit with the tabloids. Turgid. 1. Overly ornate with regards to language or style. 2. Swollen. The book wants to sound like Shakespeare, but its turgid prose reads more like an emotional thesaurus. Palliate. To make less severe. Ameliorate. The girl's cough was palliated by the cough syrup. Obeisance. A gesture of submission, e.g., bowing. The prince demands some form of obeisance from his visitors. Adumbrate. 1. To suggest or indicate, to foreshadow. 2. To outline vaguely or sketchily, without precise detail. 3. To shade or shadow. The layout of the test was adumbrated by the teacher, but he didn't tell us exactly what we needed to study. Stygian. Extremely dark or gloomy. It was horrible being lost in the Stygian depths of the abandoned coal mine. Winnow. To separate out until only the best remains. On American Idol, the voters winnow the group of 32 hopefuls down to a victor over the course of the season. Histrionic. Something overly dramatic or emotional. The woman's histrionics alarmed the other customers and caused the manager to ask her to be quiet. Charnel. A burial ground. After the battle, the valley was little more than a charnel, covered with bodies from both armies. Nostrum. An amateur, unproven cure or solution. My grandmother has nostrums like cod liver oil to cure ailments, so it's best not to get sick at her house. Apotheosis. Epitome, an ideal or perfect example. Her book report is the apotheosis of book reports. All other students should emulate it. Prevaricate. To lie. The man's well-known tendency to prevaricate makes him a liability as a trial witness. Ablution. The act of washing oneself. I need some soap and a toothbrush so I can complete my morning ablution. Vitiate. 1. To render ineffective. 2. To mar or damage. The lawyer's argument was vitiated by the contradictory evidence. Wend. To go or proceed, especially slowly. In no hurry, the man wended his way towards his hotel, stopping frequently to take in the sights. Recondite. 1. Hard to understand. 2. Obscure. Particle physics is a recondite subject, so there aren't many people who can explain it. Svelte. Thin and graceful. After months of dieting and exercise, Marcus cut a svelte figure at the party. Infinitesimal. Extremely small. Nanotechnology uses infinitesimal agents small enough to pass through cells to achieve remarkable results. Purvey. To provide or supply, especially food, drink, or provision. The Union Army relied on their supply wagons to purvey food for the soldiers. Minatory. Threatening. The police officer's minatory grip on his nightstick made us think twice about trying to get past him. Mean. Face or appearance. The flight attendant's cheerful mien disguised the anger she felt towards the rude passenger. Docent. A lecturer or guide, as in a museum. The docent led us through the exhibit and told us about the paintings. Apothegm. A maxim or aphorism. The coach loved apothegms like winners never quit. Penury. Poverty. His salary was so small he has to live in near penury. Paroxysm. A sudden outburst or fit. A paroxysm of laughter overtook her, and she was forced to leave the auditorium. Ratiocination. Logical and methodical reasoning. The mathematician's ratiocinations brought him to the answer. Dolorous. Causing or showing sadness. The cancellation of the canoe trip had a dolorous effect on the children's spirits. Distend. To swell or bloat. The dead man's body was so distended from rotting in the heat that he barely looked human. Foment. To incite, instigate, rouse. The mob's anger was fomented by the unjust verdict. Machination. A scheme or cunning plan. The boy's machinations, like promising ice cream to the fat kids if they voted for him, got him elected class president. Vertiginous. Causing vertigo or dizziness. As she was scared of heights, the girl refused to step out onto the vertiginous ledge. Ingenuous. Innocent and guileless. The boy's ingenuous delight with the talking cat made it difficult to break the news to him that it wasn't real. Arrogate. 1. To unjustly claim for oneself. 2. To unjustly attribute to someone else. Even though the whole team had a part in the design, he arrogated responsibility for it when the boss came around to praise it. Sagacious. Wise, having good judgment. My sagacious uncle never makes an imprudent decision. Alacrity. 1. Prompt eagerness or enthusiasm. 2. Haste or speed. When the rich man snapped his fingers, the waiters responded with alacrity. Aspersion. An insult. The kids don't like their teacher and never failed to cast silent aspersions at her back when she wrote on the board. Jocund. Jolly and high spirits. We found the butler drunk in the pantry and in a very jocund mood. Meretricious. 1. Superficially attractive or flashy. 2. Related to prostitutes or prostitution. The politician's argument, while it stirred his supporters, was nothing but meretricious nonsense. Sidereal. Relating to the stars. Instead of using the moon or sun to measure time, this ancient civilization seems to have come up with a sidereal calendar. Exacerbate. To make worse. The dangerous driving conditions were exacerbated by the fact that my windshield wipers weren't working. Obviate. To make unnecessary. The need for more battleships was obviated by the end of the war. Ameliorate. To make better. To improve. The donations helped to ameliorate the food shortage in the earthquake-stricken region. Phlegmatic. Calm, unemotional, stolid. Susie is good in pressure situations because she's so phlegmatic. Sere. Shriveled and dry. The plant sat forgotten and unwatered until its leaves were sere. Propinquity. Nearness in distance, time, or kinship. The drunk man's propinquity to the expensive vase made her nervous. Lupin. Wolf-like. He has a lupin quality which I mistrust. Propitious. Fortunate, favorable. How propitious that you should receive your pay just when I need to borrow money. Effete. 1. Overly refined in taste, self-indulgent, decadent. 2. Ineffectual, exhausted, effeminate. The great war hero held his effete brother in contempt. Captious. Tending to find petty faults or objections. My Aunt Agatha is so captious, she makes everyone around her nervous. Ineluctable. Inevitable, unavoidable. Given their conflicting beliefs, an argument was ineluctable. Abscond. To leave secretly and suddenly. The corrupt official absconded with more than $20 million from the national treasury. Pliant. Supple, flexible. Young plant stems are often green and pliant. Discomfit. To make uncomfortable. The sight of raw, bloody meat may discomfit some vegetarians. Fusillade. A barrage or bombardment. The fusillade of bottles and stones thrown by the angry crowd rained down on the riot police. Turpitude. Wickedness or depravity. My parents are worried that I will sink into turpitude if I move to Las Vegas, since it's known as the city of sin. Effusion. The flowing or gushing of something. The effusion of blood from the severed limb was too much for the squeamish boy. Effluent. Flowing forth like a river or stream. The orator's effluent words poured effortlessly from her mouth. Paean. An expression, often poetic or in song, of praise and joy. The songbirds burst into a joyous and melodic paean. Rapacious. Greedy, hungry, insatiable. In the movies, a villain's rapacious greed will always lead to his downfall. Seraphic. Angelic. His goodness made him seem almost seraphic. Collusion. A conspiracy. The collusion of his closest friends to effect his downfall wounded him to the heart. Peripatetic. Itinerant, constantly walking about. I understand that Luther can't help being peripatetic, but he's wearing a hole in my rug by pacing like that. Burnish. To polish something, usually metal, until it shines. The warrior wanted his shield burnished until it glowed. Gratuitous. 1. Unnecessary. 2. Bestowed freely without cost to the recipient. Many parents condemn the gratuitous violence that can be found on TV. Decry. To openly condemn or censure. He decried the astrologer as nothing but a charlatan. Epigram. A clever and concise poem, or a clever and concise paradoxical observation. He may be terribly clever, but I wish he wouldn't speak in epigrams all the time. Codify. To organize information using a coding system. For the sake of easy reference, a nation's laws are often codified. Rebus. A puzzle in which pictures or symbols represent words. A picture of an eye followed by one of a heart is a rebus, which means I love. Pusillanimous. Cowardly, timid. The pusillanimous wretch fled the minute he heard the battle trumpets sound. Dyspeptic. 1. Irritable and moody. 2. Suffering from indigestion. You'd best avoid conversation with that dyspeptic old man. Improbity. Lack of honesty or integrity. He could not put up with any hint of improbity in his employees. Mandible. 1. Invertebrate animals, the lower jaw. 2. Biting and grasping mouthparts of arthropods. The male stag beetle has large, formidable-looking mandibles. Salubrious. Beneficial for one's well-being or health. Doctors used to endorse the salubrious effects of sea air on a sickly constitution. Quotidian. Everyday, mundane. I wish to live more than a quotidian, humdrum life. Acerbic. Sharp, biting. Her acerbic insults could make even the toughest of her acquaintances cry. Susurrant. Making a whispering or rustling sound. The susurrant sound of the wind through the leaves was the only thing we could hear. Puissant. Powerful. The sword of the puissant knight killed all who dared oppose him. Pithiness. To the point. The pithiness of her language meant that her letters were rarely longer than a page. Potable. Drinkable. Having a source of potable water is a necessity when camping. Panegyric. Strong praise, possibly to excess. His letters of recommendation contained such panegyrics that no boss would be able to resist hiring him. Salacious. Lewd or titillating, of or relating to lust or the obscene. Everyone in the office was excited by the salacious rumor about the boss's extramarital affair. Appropriate. To take possession of something without permission. After many incidents of appropriating other people's food from the fridge, the roommate was asked to move out. Mince. 1. To cut into small pieces. 2. To speak or walk in an affected manner. 3. To disapprove in a polite, delicate way. She minced the garlic and then sprinkled it in the pan. Cousin. To trick, deceive. The con artist was an expert at cousining tourists. Molt. To lose an outer layer, such as fur or feathers. After molting and gaining their adult plumage, the young birds were finally able to fly out of the nest. Garrulity. State of being very talkative. Despite his garrulity, he rarely said anything worth listening to. Fetid. Foul smelling. The fetid air of the swamp made the travelers feel ill. Exigent. Urgent, demanding of immediate attention. The businessman unwisely ignored various exigent matters in order to take the afternoon off. Somniferous. Sleep-inducing. The teacher's somniferous voice put half the class to sleep before he finished the first sentence. Precipitous. Steep. The hiker had to watch her footing carefully so as not to fall in the precipitous descent. Fractious. Misbehaving, disobedient. The fractious horse fought its rider, trying desperately to buck him off. Antipodal. Exact opposite. The couple's antipodal personalities meant that they were always arguing. Disinter. To dig up. New evidence caused the authorities to disinter the corpse from its grave for an autopsy. Magniloquent. Speaking in a pompous or grandiose manner. The dean tried to impress the new students with a magniloquent speech. Sedulous. Attentive, devoted, hard-working. Sandy isn't a very sedulous worker. Mostly she just talks on the phone and surfs the web. Raconteur. A storyteller. The raconteur regaled his audience with hilarious tales of his youthful adventures. Voluble. Talkative. The man was so voluble that it was difficult for anyone else to get a word in edgewise. Miasma. Thick or sickening atmosphere. On hot and humid days, the miasma in the cheap motel's stuffy rooms was unbearable. Sate. To satisfy one's appetite. After 3 hamburgers, 2 milkshakes, and a bucket of fries, the man's appetite was finally sated. Stentorian. Loud. The teacher's stentorian voice could be heard in the hall even with the door closed. Stipple. Art technique using small dots. The artist used stippling to create the effect of shadow. Tendentious. Biased, opinionated. The editorialist's tendentious rants alienated moderates but thrilled partisans who already shared her views. Feckless. Irresponsible. Her feckless nature meant that her coworkers couldn't trust her to get anything done. Recalcitrant. Disobedient, stubborn. The recalcitrant child refused to clean her room despite her parents' threats. Punctilio. Formality, fine point of etiquette. She consulted etiquette books so she could be sure that her wedding was perfect to the last punctilio. Apocryphal. Legendary, untrue. The story that alligators live in New York City sewers is apocryphal, or at least unproven. Onus. The burden of proof. The judge pointed out that the onus was on the prosecution to prove the defendant guilty. Manumission. To free from servitude. After many years of faithful service, the slave finally earned manumission from his master. Prolix. Talkative, wordy. The editor usually had to cut her prolix columns to fit the available space. Accretion. Accumulation, buildup. After many years, the accretion of minerals blocked the pipes completely. Sinuous. Curvy, snake-like. The sinuous mountain road is a fun drive if you have a sports car. Lymphatic. Inactive, slow. Though always lymphatic, she was especially slow before her morning coffee. Sundry. Miscellaneous. After sorting and packing most of her belongings, she was left with a pile of sundry items that didn't belong in any particular category. Pied. Multicolored. After climbing about in the old attic, his clothes were pied with patches of dust and dirt. Temerity. Reckless courage. He had the temerity to ask the strict professor for an extension on the paper. Votary. A person fervently devoted to a cause. The baseball votary owned a uniform from every team and never missed a game. Adroit. Skilled. Handy. He flipped the pancake over with an adroit motion so that it landed neatly on the pan. Palimpsest. A manuscript that has been erased and written over. Through careful examination, the scholar was able to read what had previously been written on the palimpsest. Puerile. Immature. You might think that it's puerile for a 30-year-old to play with G.I. Joes, but I disagree. Imprecation. A curse. He pricked his finger on the needle and uttered an imprecation. Indemnify. To protect from or compensate for damage. After the fire, he felt that the insurance money did not indemnify the loss of his treasured belongings. Cavil. To make petty complaints or criticisms. He couldn't criticize the whole plan, so he cavilled about the details. Pyretic. Having to do with fever. Suffering from a pyretic ailment, he tried to cool himself with damp cloths. Commodious. Roomy. She had room in her commodious bag for a newspaper, a picnic lunch, and a complete change of clothes. Latent. Hidden, underlying. The would-be artist had plenty of latent talent, but needed training to develop it. Diaphanous. Gauzy, thin and transparent. The princess's wedding veil is made of priceless diaphanous fabric, as delicate as it is beautiful. Disabuse. To free from a false belief. He took it as his mission in life to disabuse others of their illusions and began telling children there was no Santa Claus. Contumacious. Stubbornly rebellious or disobedient. The contumacious soldier was eventually court-martialed for his refusal to follow orders. Ornithology. The study of birds. She has a degree in ornithology and spends every summer in Alaska observing birds. Nabob. A powerful person. The rich businessman was a local nabob, holding more power than the elected officials. Truculence. Rudeness, belligerence. The dog's truculence required him to be kept away from other animals, as he would always try to bite them. Mimetic. Imitative. She was known for her mimetic skills, which she displayed in hilariously accurate imitations of her teachers. Tautological. 1. Unnecessary repetition. 2. A statement that is always true. All bald men lack hair is a tautological statement. Repine. To be discontented, to miss something absent. During his semester abroad, he repined for American hamburgers. Plebeian. Low class, common. She considered store-bought clothes plebeian and insisted that everything she wore be custom-made. Invidious. 1. Intended to make someone upset. 2. Discriminatory. Her invidious comments sowed discord and caused quarrels wherever she went. Offal. Animal guts, waste parts. At the end of the day, the butcher washed away the offal from his workspace. Ductile. Easily stretched out or shaped. She played with the ductile material, stretching it out into different shapes. Astrolabe. An old-fashioned tool used to measure altitude. Some people say that Hypatia invented the first astrolabe, which she used in her observations of the stars. Imprimatur. Mark of approval. The guidebook was so well researched that it earned the imprimatur of the local historical society. Descry. To see, to notice with difficulty. From the top of the ridge, we could just descry the campground in the distance. Peroration. A formal speech. The statesman finished his peroration celebrating the peace and was met with a thunderous applause. Abscission. The act of cutting something off or out of something else. The doctor made a careful abscission to remove the potentially cancerous mole. Saturnine. Gloomy, sullen, morose. The saturnine teenager always wears black and rarely smiles. Privation. The state of not having, being deprived. The settlers suffered severe privation throughout the winter, and many starved or froze to death. Draconian. Harsh. The dictator issued draconian rules that controlled every aspect of his subjects' lives. Louche. Oblique or devious, squinting. The defendant's louche expression made the jurors think he was hiding something. Pedant. Know-it-all. The grammar pedant argued over the placement of every comma in the proposal. Beatify. 1. To make into a saint. 2. To make very happy. Mother Teresa was officially beatified by the Church after her death. Interlocutor. Speaker, conversation partner. After their conversation was over, the interlocutors shook hands and walked away. Expiation. Penance, making up for an offense. He bought flowers and chocolates in an attempt at expiation, but she wouldn't forgive him. Enunciate. To speak clearly. You can tell he was once a stage actor by the way he enunciates every syllable he speaks. Apposite. Relevant, appropriate. He explained the answer well and gave several apposite examples. Rococo. Elaborate, highly decorated. The Rococo clock featured carved figures moving in an elaborate dance. Paucity. A lack. The teenagers complained about the paucity of things to do in their small town. Asurient. Greedy, avaricious. The asurient child wasn't content with his own Halloween candy, so he stole his brother's. Arboreal. Having to do with trees. The park was shaded by arboreal greenery. Obstreperous. Disobedient, stubbornly misbehaving. The obstreperous child refused to do anything his parents asked. Atavistic. Returning to or reminiscent of something ancient or ancestral. The man's hairy back and heavy brow gave him a primitive atavistic appearance. Truculent. Quarrelsome. The man's truculent attitude gets him into a lot of unnecessary conflicts. Supercilious. Rudely superior, proud, self-satisfied. The proud man responded to all offers of help with a supercilious refusal. Ossify. To harden. After thousands of years, wood can ossify into stone. Sophomoric. Immature. His sophomoric sense of humor made him giggle whenever someone referred to their six-member group as a sextet. Unctuous. 1. False show of excessive politeness. 2. Oily. The servant's unctuous manner hid a deep hatred of his masters. Probity. Integrity. The official's probity meant that he would never take a bribe. Canard. A lie. My opponent's charge that I took illegal campaign funds is a canard. Potentate. A powerful person. Through personal charm and cultivating connections, he became a potentate in town society. Tumid. Swollen. The Tumid River was in danger of reaching flood levels. Quittance. 1. A release from a debt. 2. Something given in repayment. He helped her move into a new apartment, and she bought him dinner in quittance. Simulacrum. A representation or simulation. Pornography is typically little more than a simulacrum of human passion. Primeval. Ancient, dating to pre-human times. The primeval landscape was untouched by any sort of human trace. Preternatural. Supernatural, extraordinary. The identical twins had a preternatural ability of knowing what the other one was thinking. Assiduous. Devoted, diligent, hard-working. The assiduous student always turned her work in early. Incipient. About to begin. She noticed her skin was beginning to redden in the sun and knew a sunburn was incipient. Errant. Complete, total, unmitigated. Do not trust him. He is an errant scoundrel. Perfidious. False, disloyal. The perfidious knight betrayed his king and helped the enemy. Tup. To have sex, applied to sheep. The shepherd was especially busy during his flock's tupping time. Retrench. To reduce or diminish, especially costs. The loss of his job forced the man to retrench his lavish lifestyle. Verisimilitude. Having the appearance of truth. The verisimilitude of the silk flowers was such that the strangers often bent to smell them. Sinecure. A position that pays well but requires little or no work. The lazy man wanted a sinecure that would pay him well without his having to do work for it. Potage. Stew, thick soup. On snowy days, she cooked up a rich potage of potatoes and onions for dinner. Quixotic. Impractically idealistic. Despite her homeless and jobless state, she persisted in her quixotic belief that all would turn out right in the end. Assay. 1. To try. 2. To test. 3. To evaluate. After several assays, she finally successfully climbed over the fence. Aquiline. Like an eagle or an eagle's beak. Her aquiline nose gave her a striking profile. Arable. Able to be cultivated, fertile. The colonists settled on arable land and began to plant their crops. Escarpment. A steep slope or cliff. The castle was protected by a steep escarpment. Sinewy. Showing muscles, wiry. He developed a keen eye and sinewy arms from a lifetime spent as a sailor. Royal. To stir up, to upset. The child knew just what to say to roil his older brother. Lassitude. Laziness, fatigue. After a busy week, she indulged her lassitude by spending Saturday in bed. Heterodox. Not following the rules, unorthodox. The teacher encouraged heterodox thinking to the dismay of the more conventional school principal. Interdict. To forbid. The new rules interdicted a wide range of formerly permitted behaviors. Philippic. Harsh criticism. Every week the columnist wrote another philippic on something he hated. Brumal. Relating to winter. The snow-covered streets and the lazy drifting snowflakes made for a lovely brumal scene. Exculpate. To free from guilt. The other man's confession exculpated the first suspect. Legerdemain. 1. Deception or trickery. 2. Magic or sleight of hand. Most used car salesmen resort to some legerdemain or another to cheat buyers. Bucolic. Pastoral, rustic, rural. The red-painted barn and grazing cows made for a bucolic scene. Imbroglio. A difficult or confused situation. Allegations and counter-allegations caught the politician in an imbroglio of scandal. Incorrigibility. Stubbornness, refusal to change. He took pride in his incorrigibility and refused to alter his ways. Wastrel. Someone who spends all their money, the opposite of a miser. Despite his millions, the man was such a wastrel that by the end of his life he didn't have a penny. Masticate. To chew. He took a bite of tough jerky and had to masticate for several minutes before swallowing. Interregnum. A period without a monarch in a monarchy, a transition period. Between Charles I and Charles II was an interregnum marked by civil war. Infelicity. Something inappropriate or unfortunate. The gross infelicities in the freshman's writing style made her professor wince. Baleful. Harmful, sinister. His baleful expression suggested he wouldn't stand for the teasing much longer. Ovoid. Egg-shaped. The alien's ovoid spacecraft was made of curved sheets of metal invisibly fused together. Apostate. One who rejects his previous belief. He became an apostate after his child was murdered, refusing to believe that God could allow such a thing to happen. Gerrymander. To assign political districts as to give one party an advantage. His first action on gaining office was to redraw the district boundaries that his corrupt predecessor had gerrymandered. Anathema. A person or object that is hated or cursed. She loved cats, but dogs were anathema to her. She couldn't stand them. Occlude. To obstruct or block. The fallen tree occluded the path, making it impossible to go on. Repast. Meal. On the night of his visit, his friends provided a sumptuous 6-course repast. Maculated. Spotted. The carpet in the cheap motel room was maculated by years of spilled beer and cigarette burns. Leonine. Like a lion. His leonine mane of hair gave him a wild appearance. Peccadillo. An insignificant sin or offense. The roommates overlooked each other's peccadillos to maintain peace in their apartment. Jejune. Uninteresting, dull, childish. She found his conversation jejune and downright boring. Turbid. In turmoil, muddy. After the storm, the stream was turbid and full of branches. Cogitate. To think intensely. Faced with a difficult problem, the mathematician spent days sitting and cogitating. Febrile. Feverish. The febrile feel of the boy's forehead made his mom worried enough to call the doctor. Malinger. To pretend to be sick. No one can accuse Chuck of malingering. He has been to work every day for the past 15 years. Cant. 1. Language particular to a group. 2. Hypocritical or cliché language. After her boss took credit for her project, the worker realized that his talk of personal responsibility and hard work had been only cant. Resplendent. Splendid, shining. At the ball, the princess was resplendent in a shimmering silk gown and beautiful jewels. Effluvia. 1. Waste residue. 2. Radiation or air given off by something. Returning to her parents' home from college, she found the effluvia of her teenage years still in her old room. Prehensile. Able to hold or grasp. An elephant's prehensile trunk can accomplish an amazing range of tasks. Reconnoiter. To investigate or look over. The army sent an advance guard to reconnoiter the enemy's new position. Abstemious. Characterized by moderation or self-denial, especially with eating or drinking. Since he's allergic to almost everything, Marcus has to be abstemious when he goes out to eat. Viscid. Sticky. The child was fascinated by the viscid gloppiness of the rubber cement. Spurious. False, not authentic. She said she was descended from royalty, but we later found out that the claim was spurious. Visage. A face or appearance. The old woman's wrinkled visage showed a lifetime of experience. Carapace. Hard covering, a shell. The tortoise's shell provided a protective carapace for its soft body. Perspicacious. Intelligent, insightful. The coach's perspicacious comments and useful advice helped his team improve its performance. Noisome. Offensive, disgusting. The noisome odor in the filthy bathroom made him retch. August. Important, noble, revered. The city was honored to be visited by such an august personage. Martinet. A strict person, a stickler for the rules. The teacher was a real martinet, giving D's and F's on assignments for the slightest errors. Limpid. Clear, calm. The garden had a limpid pool where one could plainly see fish darting in its depths. Dilatory. Slow, delayed. His dilatory approach to homework meant that he rarely finished anything on time. Philistine. An uncultured person, someone who does not appreciate art. The Philistine preferred a film full of explosions to anything with a sustained conversation. Maladroit. Clumsy, tactless, not adept. He was so maladroit he could break something just by looking at it. Abjure. To renounce or repudiate formally. After completing the 12-step program, the alcoholic swore to abjure drinks forever. Diffidence. Timidity, shyness. The boy's diffidence was easy to read in his slumped shoulders and in the fact that he never made eye contact with anyone. Hirsute. Hairy. Ed's back is so hirsute he should shave it or have it waxed. Perfidy. Betrayal. His friend never forgave him for his perfidy in insulting him behind his back. Draught. To make a blueprint of, to draft. The architect drafted the plans for the new building. Arabesque. 1. An ornate design. 2. A pose in ballet. The old clock was marked by arabesques of elaborate carvings. Exegesis. Explanation of a text. She wrote an exegesis of the difficult passage, explaining it sentence by sentence. Vagary. A quirk. Due to the vagaries of scheduling, we didn't see each other at all during the conference. Calumny. False accusation. A lie. Unable to find any real dirt on his opponent, the politician had to resort to calumny and false rumors. Jocose. Joking, humorous. The air of the friendly meeting was jocose rather than serious. Asperity. Harshness. Irritated by the unnecessary questions, she replied with asperity. Deign. To do something condescendingly, to lower oneself to do. My rich Aunt Jenny would never deign to take a bus anywhere. Infetter. To lock up in chains. The criminal was infettered so that he could not escape. Demur. 1. To disagree. 2. To delay. Rather than answering his question immediately, she demurred, saying she would need to think it over. Moribund. 1. Dying, lifeless. 2. Without energy or vitality. The movie was so moribund that not even the action scenes kept people interested. Inculcate. To instill, to indoctrinate. The father inculcated his child with a sense of duty to the family. Querulous. Whining, complaining. The querulous child whimpered and whined because the Cocoa Puffs box was empty. Obloquy. Criticism, disgrace. Faced with the life of obloquy after the scandal, he changed his name and left the country. Appreciable. Perceptible. The efforts of the firemen made no appreciable difference to the raging fire. Peregrinate. To wander or travel, especially on foot. The old man peregrinated nightly around his neighborhood, enjoying the easy exercise and the fresh air. Mellifluous. Musical, sweet-sounding. The girl's mellifluous singing soothed the cranky child. Propitiate. To appease, to conciliate, to make favorable. The litigant was propitiated by the settlement the jury awarded him. Eviscerate. 1. To gut. 2. To remove the substance of. The new curfew law was eviscerated by the decision to set curfew at 4 a.m. Decouple. To separate two things. The last car was decoupled from the train and remained in the station while the rest of the train continued on its journey. Evince. To show. She evinced an interest in his unusual story. Virago. A strong woman, traditionally used as a term of criticism. The powerful female leader was called a virago by her detractors, but she simply laughed at them. Sibilant. Hissing. She made a sibilant sound to try to get the snake's attention. Interstice. A gap or space between two things. He was the CEO during the interstice between the original owners and the new ones. Excoriate. 1. To criticize strongly. 2. To skin. His questionable behavior was excoriated by a hostile press. Epicene. Androgynous. Babies are often epicene to the casual observer, which is perhaps why some parents so insist on color-coding their offspring as pink or blue. Celerity. Speed. Haste. The celerity of his email replies to urgent matters was much appreciated by his coworkers. Lapidary. 1. Relating to precious stones. 2. Precise and refined. Having worked as a gem cutter for 2 decades, he had a wealth of lapidary knowledge. Eschew. To avoid. If you have trouble sleeping, eschew caffeine at night. Opprobrium. 1. Criticism of shameful behavior. 2. Sense of disgrace or shame. His speeches promoting violence against his detractors were met with mass opprobrium. Pan. To judge and find poor. The picky movie critic panned nearly every film he saw, finding none of them up to his high standards. Gossamer. Delicate, gauzy. The sunlight and dew highlighted the gossamer threads of the spiderweb. Lachrymose. 1. Tearful. 2. Very sad, sorrowful. When feeling depressed, she would lock herself in a room to listen to lachrymose music and cry. Scintilla. 1. A tiny amount. 2. A glint or spark. If you had a scintilla of common sense, you would walk away from this situation before you get into worse trouble. Apogee. The highest point. The undisputed apogee of his career was playing Hamlet at the Globe Theatre. Everything was downhill after that. Abattoir. A slaughterhouse. The abattoir has a grated floor so that all the blood and guts can drain down to be washed out. Semaphore. A system of signals, especially lights or flags, used for communication. With their radio down, the ship tried to signal other boaters through semaphore. Bedizen. To decorate in a gaudy manner. Mother refused to let him bedizen the house with glow-in-the-dark Santa figurines. Specious. Appearing true, but actually false. Purposefully deceptive. Many opponents of science produce specious evidence that really has no validity. Abrogate. To formally repeal. The state legislature has threatened to abrogate the university's right to self-governance. Wheedle. To cajole. To persuade using trickery or flattery. The salesman wheedled a free meal out of the elderly couple. Plenary. Total or complete. Only the president and his closest aides are allowed to have plenary knowledge of the secret mission. Labile. Changeable, ever-changing. Every parent is aware how labile teenagers' tastes are. Their dress and hairstyles change almost weekly. Gauche. Lacking grace or tact. The club members dismissed him as terribly gauche and refused to invite him again. Profligate. Spendthrift, wastefully extravagant. Many critics are concerned about the government's profligate spending, which has driven the national debt to a record high. Accede. 1. To concede or give consent. 2. To come into a position of authority. The landlord was so insistent that the tenant had no choice but to accede and pay the extra fee. Maunder. To meander. To move or speak without purpose or direction. Cease your maundering chatter and get to the point. Quietus. The ending or elimination of something. Death. The revelation that they were eating human flesh, not chicken, resulted in a quietus to conversation. Vituperate. To verbally abuse, to scold. The boy's mother vituperated him for stealing money out of her purse. Pecuniary. Relating to money. He was incapable of managing his pecuniary affairs and squandered his inheritance within 3 days. Capacious. Roomy, spacious. Airplane hangars have to be capacious structures because they house such massive machines. Thaumaturgy. The performance of miracles. Unless you specialize in thaumaturgy, you'll have to accept the fact that your canary is dead. Penumbra. 1. A shadow. 2. Something that obscures or shrouds. The store's awning provided a penumbra of relief from the vicious sun. Eschatology. The theological study of the apocalyptic end of the world. People who study eschatology tend to be cheerful, despite their grim beliefs. Obdurate. Stubborn, hardened. Mules are notoriously obdurate creatures. They'll only work when they want to. Ingress. The act of entering. The young lady's ingress into the adult world began at her quinceañera. Impecunious. Poor, penniless. Ethel, being pecunious, had little chance of ever owning a vacation home. Extant. Still in existence. There are only 2 extant sources of this particular mineral left in the world. Expiate. To atone or make amends for wrongdoing. The man tried to expiate the guilt over his horrible crime by devoting his life to warning people of the danger of drinking and driving. Mendacious. Characterized by or pertaining to lying. Con artists are mendacious criminals. Acrid. Unpleasantly sharp in taste, bitter, harsh. The newspaper won't publish an editorial so acrid in tone. Enfranchise. To give someone the right of citizenship, especially the right to vote. Archibald did not believe that the government should enfranchise women. Piquant. Delightfully lively and engaging. Although she always disagrees with me, I find her opinions charmingly piquant. Tenebrous. Gloomy, dark. The moon was shrouded by clouds on that tenebrous night. Riparian. Of or relating to a river or river bank. They rode silently along, afraid to disturb the tranquility of the riparian scene. Mercurial. Volatile, temperamental. It is difficult to live with a mercurial roommate. You never know, one moment to the next, what kind of mood they'll be in. Veritable. Being genuine, being truly itself. These paintings are the work of a veritable genius. Fealty. Loyalty or devotion. Her fealty to her father was unshakable. Efficacious. Effective. Mariko thought that direct confrontation would be the most efficacious action to take. Redolent. 1. Reminiscent or evocative of. 2. Aromatic. For Margaret, the spring water was redolent with memories of her childhood. Cadge. To beg, to mooch. She has money, but she's always cadging free meals from me. Dissemble. To lie, to conceal the truth. That dissembling brat has never told the truth in her entire life. Fatuous. Foolish, silly. Sadie is a fatuous girl who only thinks of makeup and movie stars. Indelible. Inerasable, irremovable. His mother's harsh words had left an indelible mark upon his mind. Autodidactic. Self-taught. Olaf argued that many great historical figures were autodidactic and that he really didn't need to attend school. Anhydrous. Dry, devoid of water. The Gobi Desert is an extremely anhydrous region. Cupidity. Lust, greed. The miser's cupidity was such that he always desired more money. Arresting. Attention-grabbing, striking. Her arresting good looks convinced her that she was on her way to fame and fortune. Positivist. One who believes that knowledge can only be verified by the sense perceptions. The positivist scorned the blind faith of his religious family. Sobriquet. Nickname, moniker. She was such a chubby little girl that her father bestowed the sobriquet Little Piggy on her. Apoplectic. 1. A brain hemorrhage or stroke. 2. A fit or outburst of anger. My dad was apoplectic when I told him that I had crashed the car. Chattel. A movable piece of personal property. Until the abolition of slavery in the United States, slaves were considered chattel. Viceroy. Governmental figure who rules as the representative of a sovereign. The king punished the viceroy for his mismanagement of the region's governance. Euphony. Pleasant or harmonious sound. The euphony of tinkling wind chimes wafted in through the window. Nebulous. Cloudy, indistinct, vague. Your plans for the future are nebulous at the moment. Vernal. Fresh and new, like spring. The cherry trees blossomed in a vernal explosion of pale pink. Ersatz. An inferior imitation or replacement. We had no choice but to rent an ersatz car held together with twine. Spleen. Bad temper, a body organ which serves to regulate and filter blood. The irate uncle often vented his spleen by throwing eggs at his nephew. Encomium. Praise. The lawyer launched into an encomium on his client's impeccable character. Phalanx. A compact group of people, usually with connotations of military and war. A veritable phalanx of cheek-pinching ants descended upon the poor child. Riven. To be split or torn. Their marriage was riven beyond repair and ended shortly thereafter. Aerate. To air out, to expose or introduce to air. We opened the windows so that we could aerate the apartment and clear it of the smell of cleaning supplies. Penurious. Poor or penniless, stingy or frugal. The penurious family begged for pennies and scraps of food. Analgesia. Loss of the sensation of pain without losing consciousness. The odd thing about being in a state of analgesia is that you can see the blood, but it doesn't hurt. Beatitude. State of utmost happiness or blessedness, the declarations made by Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. In that tropical paradise, she could nothing else but rejoice in the beatitude of existence. Sibyl. A female oracle, a prophetess. For advice, Albert visited a shabby-looking sibyl on the street corner. Factious. prone to internal contention. The working environment there was too factious for me, so I resigned. Crepuscular, having the quality of twilight. The crepuscular light was soft and violet in color. Inveigle, to obtain by flattery or cunning. Every morning he went to the cafe to inveigle a bagel from the waiter. Presage, to foreshadow, to foretell. Your incompetence in this case does not presage good things for the future. Spavined, decrepit, dilapidated. The spavined car sat on blocks in the front yard. Purloin, to steal. I would appreciate it if you didn't purloin my private letters. Yen, a yearning or desire for something. Dominique has a yen for Italian food this evening. Supine, in a resting position, inert. Her husband was content to remain at home every day, supine on the sofa. Dulcet, sweet, agreeable. The dulcet sound of the girl singing lulled me to sleep. Tensile, pliable, able to be pulled or stretched. Taffy is a very tensile material. Tremulous, shaky or unstable, fearful. His hold on the tree branch was tremulous. Quiescence, state of rest or quiet. The Duchess assumed his quiescence meant agreement. Redoubtable, formidable, impressive. The 7-foot wrestler was a redoubtable foe indeed. Garner, to gather, to accumulate. His charitable actions garnered much praise. Quiescent, quiet, in a state of rest. Amelia was so quiescent as a baby, we thought something was wrong with her. Lissom, supple, flexible. Professional dancers have to be very lissom. Abeyance, temporary halt. The Little League game was held in abeyance while the pitcher, who had wandered off between innings, was located. Fluvial, relating to a river or stream. When he retires, my father wishes to spend his days fishing in a fluvial environment. Importune, to repeatedly entreat or ask. The child importuned her nanny to let him stay up late. Ancillary, supplementary, secondary. Many birth control pills also reduce acne as an ancillary effect. Raiment, clothing. The man's impeccably tailored raiment made his wealth obvious. Shibboleth, a word or style of speech which identifies one as a member of a group, jargon. The academic was snubbed by other intellectuals because he refused to learn the shibboleths of the profession. Verdant, lush and green, inexperienced. In winter, the usually verdant garden is bare. Barbarous, uncivilized, savage. Noriaki believed that eating unpeeled fruit was a barbarous practice. Insouciant, unconcerned. What I can't stand about her is her insouciant attitude towards life. Cherry, wary, suspicious. The teacher was more cherry after the student tied his shoelaces together. Risible, laughable, ridiculous. His attempts to grab the goose were risible. Valence, ornamental drapery. We can use that lovely valence to decorate the edge of Mildred's bed. Coffer, a chest or box used to store money. Open the coffers and give freely to the poor, the king exclaimed. Chimerical, imaginary, fanciful. When you haven't eaten or slept for days, you start to see chimerical apparitions and hear voices. Deleterious, harmful. Eating lard every day is deleterious for one's health. Solecism, a mistake in etiquette, improper conduct. Please forgive my solecism at the party last night. Homologous. Similar in structure. The two buildings were so homologous nobody could tell them apart. Saccharine. Excessively sweet. Don't you try and mollify me with your saccharine words. Egress. The act of exiting or emerging. Despite her popularity, her egress from the room went unnoticed. Nugatory. Inconsequential. The color of the ribbon is a nugatory detail, don't you think? Insensible. Incapable of feeling, unaware or unresponsive. You must be insensible to turn a hungry child away from your door. Recumbent. In a reclined position. She lay in a recumbent position watching the clouds go by. Sartorial. Pertaining to clothing. Everyone at the prom admired Michael's sartorial splendor. Metonymy. Figure of speech where a word or term is used to mean something which is closely associated with it. The use of the term Stars and Stripes to mean the United States flag is an example of metonymy. Parvenu. A newly rich person who is uncultured or unsophisticated. Their neighbors in Beverly Hills hated the lotto-winning parvenus, who moved in and promptly started throwing keg parties and parking their cars in the lawn. Vitreous. Of, resembling, or pertaining to glass. The chemists do not know what to make of the clear vitreous substance. Ululation. A loud wail or howl. During the eulogy, the widower let loose a mournful ululation. Dialectical. Having arrived at a conclusion through the exchange of logical arguments. Eventually, a dialectical debate will arrive at a single conclusion. Workaday. Mundane. Bored with her workaday existence, Gloria began plotting world domination. Detritus. Debris. Fragments broken off from a hole. The construction site was covered in detritus. Prosaic. Lacking imagination. Straightforward. His writing style was too prosaic to be considered sophisticated. Hoary. 1. Old or ancient. 2. Gray or white, especially due to old age. The hoary designer had witnessed innumerable fashion fads and phases. Benighted. Ignorant or uneducated. The lack of a proper education had left the girl benighted. Teleology. 1. The study of the ultimate purpose of natural objects. 2. The belief in final cause or end to history. She believed in a peculiar teleology whereby all the world would eventually be rounded into a suitable ping-pong ball for the gods to play with. Zephyr. A gentle breeze. A zephyr rustled the leaves of the poplar trees. Coif. To arrange hair. The vain heiress spent 5 hours coiffing her hair. Extirpate. 1. To completely destroy. 2. To remove. The Viking commanded his men to extirpate the enemy village. Mendicant. A beggar. The mendicants in that neighborhood are surprisingly well clothed. Vulpine. 1. Cunning. 2. Of or resembling a fox. Her vulpine ways made her a natural con artist. Exsanguinate. To empty of blood. Vampires exsanguinate their victims. Emolument. Salary or other compensation for employment. CEOs today receive emolument that is so lavish that it would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Modal. Capable of movement. Those spores are modal, which means it will be harder to isolate them. Zoftig. Curvaceous, shapely. Check out the curves on that Zoftig babe. Immolate. 1. To sacrifice yourself or something to a cause. 2. To kill or destroy. The unlucky victim was immolated on the altar of the pagan priest. Decant. To pour, especially wine, from one container to another. One should always decant vintage wine before serving it. Derogate. 1. To insult or mock. 2. To depart from a standard or norm. 3. To subtract from. Jane liked John very much and wouldn't let anyone derogate him. Traduce. To say bad things about someone, often falsely. She used her blog as a way to traduce anyone who got on her nerves. Douceurs. Something sweet or pleasant. She wrote greeting card poems and other meaningless douceurs. Coeval. At the same time. Dinosaurs were not coeval with humans, who did not evolve until much later. Sumptuary. Regulating spending or behavior. In Renaissance England, sumptuary laws controlled the kinds of clothing members of different classes could wear. Bloviate. To go on pompously and at great length. Much to the dismay of the newlyweds, the best man bloviated for an hour before someone managed to get him off the microphone. Contemn. To despise, disdain. After becoming famous, the actor openly contemned the people from his hometown. Flotilla. A fleet of small boats. A flotilla of rowboats filled the harbor. Sororal. Sisterly. The two girls were cousins, but their close relationship was almost sororal. Agnate. A relative on the father's side of the family. His agnates were rich, but his mother's family was poor. Petrous. Relating to rock. The structure was built of a petrous material, so it will be there for a long time. Pertinacious. Persistent, stubborn. The pertinacious child would never stop asking why, no matter how her parents tried to stop her. Synecdoche. A reference to part of something as standing in for the whole. Referring to people as souls or hands is a form of synecdoche. Froward. Contrary, disobedient. She was so froward we couldn't make her do anything except what she wanted to do. Defenestration. The act of throwing out of a window. Defenestration is a messy solution to computer problems because afterwards you have to clean up the debris under the window. Turgescent. 1. Swelling. 2. Pompous. When he woke up after the accident, he found a turgescent lump on his head. Provender. Food, especially for livestock. She made sure her horse was well provided with provender before going into her own dinner. Sententious. Pompous and moralizing. The teenager ignored his father's sententious advice about relationships because he had been divorced 4 times. Volant. 1. Able to fly. 2. Agile. For a while, it was difficult to believe that Michael Jordan wasn't volant. Raffish. 1. Showy in a cheap way, vulgar. 2. Carefree, rakish. His raffish good looks attracted women's attention, but they also made women cautious with him. Abecedarian. 1. Of or related to the alphabet. 2. Elementary, basic. He was abecedarian with girls, so he wasn't sure where to take her on their first date. Edacious. Relating to eating, greedy for food. The child's edacious eyes were fixed on the stranger's mouth as he ate his lunch. Anodyne. An alleviator of pain. She found liquor to be an adequate anodyne for her toothache. Xeric. Suited to a dry habitat. Cacti are xeric plants, adapted to the harsh life of the desert. Senescent. Aging. The senescent car had given good service for years, but was soon to wind up in the junkyard. Prate. To chatter. The child prated and prattled until his brother told him to shut up. Expatiate. 1. To go on at length. 2. To wander. He could expatiate for hours about his obsessions when he found a willing listener. Sanative. Something that heals. Everyone has their favorite sanative to make themselves feel better, from chocolate to a phone call home. Onanistic. Masturbatory, self-indulgent. This story is an onanistic exercise. No one would want to read it except the author. Acidulous. Sour. The lemon drops were too acidulous and not sweet enough for his taste. Funicular. Of, related to, or operated by a rope or cable. She rigged up a funicular apparatus with rope and pulleys to move her laundry down the hall to the washer and dryer. Ferrous. Of or resembling iron. The prisoner looked through the ferrous bars of her cell. Concupiscence. Lust. One twin lived a life of abstinence in a monastery, while the other indulged his concupiscence whenever possible. Oblation. An offering. He brought an oblation of gold to the king, hoping for mercy. Detumescence. Shrinking, deflating. The day after the party, the room offered the depressing sight of balloons in detumescence. Donzel. A page, squire. The knight was followed by his faithful donzel, who helped him with his horse and armor. Nacre. Iridescent material, as in mother of pearl. The chessboard was made of alternate squares of nacre and onyx. Fledge. 1. To grow feathers. 2. To grow up. After waiting for years for their children to fledge and move out on their own, the parents were glad to finally have the house to themselves. Numinous. Supernatural, sublime, divine. The numinous grove created the impression that there were elves behind every tree. Limb. To outline, to describe. He limned a characterization of his friend so vivid that I felt I had met her. Involute. Intricate. The cathedral ceiling was decorated with the lacework of involute carvings. Fulgent. Bright, shining. The reflective windows of the skyscraper were fulgent in the setting sun. Ichthyology. The study of fish. She specialized in ichthyology and spent a great deal of time on boats collecting specimens. Homiletic. A lecture or sermon with a moral theme. Even when at home, the priest still spoke in a homiletic manner. Comestibles. Eatables. He prepared a huge pile of tasty comestibles for the picnic. Halcyon. Peaceful, prosperous. He remembered that halcyon summer as the most perfect time in his life. Pulchritude. Beauty. The pub's booming business was mostly due to the barmaid's pulchritude. Bilious. 1. Relating to bile. 2. Cranky. His perpetually bilious demeanor made kids cross the street when they saw him coming. Tumescent. Swelling. Her arthritic hands were painfully tumescent. Auretic. Relating to desire. Her new book of poems was an auretic celebration, chronicling the fulfillment of desires of all sorts. Depilate. To remove hair from. He purposefully depilated his scalp because he thought he looked good bald. Scruple. To refuse to do something on principle. Although he prided himself on telling the truth to others about their faults, he did not scruple to lie when it came to his own weaknesses. Tyro. A beginner. Though the others laughed and called him a tyro, the newcomer blew them all away with his talent. Wassail. 1. A toast or drinking celebration. 2. A type of spiced wine beverage. Every Christmas he made a big batch of wassail for his friends to drink. Effulgence. Brightness, shine. He polished his car until its effulgence made you squint or look away. Suborn. To make another person go against the law. The bully suborned weaker children into doing his dirty work for him. Palaver. 1. Chatter. 2. Formal discussion or meeting. She saw that his palaver was simply a delaying tactic and asked him to get to the point. Exiguous. Extremely small quantity, scanty. He was dismayed when he opened his lunchbox and found only a pickle, a truly exiguous meal. Conscript. To draft, to require military service. The young man refused to be conscripted because he believed killing people was wrong. Ursine. Of, resembling, or related to bears. The cave had obviously been an Ursine residence the previous winter, but no bears lived there now. Xyloid. Wood or wood-like. The table appears to be xyloid, but it's difficult to tell if it's really made of wood. Sapient. Intelligent. Many people believe there is sapient life elsewhere in the universe. Splenetic. 1. Irritable. 2. Relating to the spleen. They couldn't be more different. One is splenetic, while the other is unflappably cheerful. Coruscate. To glitter. The diamond necklace winked and coruscated in the candlelight. Cunctatious. Tending to delay. Knowing his cunctatious nature, she asked well in advance for anything she needed from him. Quiddity. 1. Essence. 2. Minor distinction. He had a job distilling long and complex scripts to their quiddity, stripped of all details. Melisma. A melody in which one syllable is held over several notes. Medieval church music involves harmonized melismas. Skein. A coil or loop of material, i.e., yarn, rope, or hair. The knitter had dozens of skeins of yarn stacked away for future projects. Porcine. Of, resembling, or related to pigs. His nose was strangely snout-like, giving his whole face a porcine appearance. Mordant. Biting, incisive. Her mordant wit and keen perceptiveness were sometimes disconcerting for those used to a more sugar-coated approach. Vexillology. The study of flags. While sailing around the world, she took up vexillology, using the flags of various other vessels she encountered as study materials. Percipient. Able to perceive, perceptive. The fashion designer had a percipient eye for striking color combinations. Perlustrate. To inspect thoroughly. The customs official perlustrated my passport before reluctantly letting me pass. Glabrous. Smooth, hairless. The man wore a toupee to hide his glabrous scalp. Vacillant. Wavering. His vacillant gaze moved around the room, never fixing on a single point. Desuetude. Being out of use and in decline. The house stood unoccupied and in desuetude for several years before someone knocked it down. Pervert. 1. To corrupt. 2. To twist or distort. The woman stopped giving interviews because the journalist always pervert the meaning of her statements. Quail. To be fearful, to cringe in fear. The wrestler quailed at the sight of his huge opponent. Blunt. To make less sharp or forceful. The teacher blunted her criticisms of the paper so that the student wouldn't cry. Stump. 1. To baffle or perplex. 2. To walk heavily. John was stumped by the trigonometry question. Fawn. To dote on or flatter excessively. I know she's adorable, but you really shouldn't fawn over her like that. Rash. Hasty. You would still have some money if you weren't so rash in making investment decisions. Smart. To cause sharp pain. My hand still smarts from where you hit me with the ruler. Calculating. Cunning and shrewd. I wouldn't trust his apparent generosity. He's too calculating to do something nice without a motivation. Grave. Serious. Please do not laugh about such a grave matter. Waffle. To communicate indecisively or evasively. The girl's parents waffled over whether to let her go to the dance, first saying she could and then saying she couldn't. Intimate. To hint, to state indirectly. The politician was sworn to secrecy about the project, but he nevertheless intimated key facts about it to the reporter. Rake. A shameless, immoral person, libertine. Jake is such a rake, he'll sleep with anyone, even if they're married. Mean. A small quantity. He can barely afford a sandwich on the mean allowance his mom gives him. Truck. 1. To engage in. 2. To barter or sell wares. We don't truck in illegal goods, so if you want drugs, you'll have to go somewhere else. Pedestrian. Ordinary, dull, common. What he had hoped would be a great masterpiece turned out to be a rather pedestrian piece of work. Wax. To increase or grow stronger. During the day, he could barely climb 4 flights of stairs, but at night the superhero's power waxed and he could vault over skyscrapers. Grating. 1. Irritating. 2. Causing a harsh and unpleasant sound. Everyone finds her voice melodious, but I find it grating. Toy. To play around with, to think over casually. The cafe was toying with the idea of selling beer. Alloy. To mix together. When alloyed with water, alcohol loses its potency. Yarn. A long tale, usually about wondrous or adventurous things. We crowded around the old sailor, anxious to hear his yarn. Rustle. 1. To make soft, crinkling sounds while moving. 2. To steal livestock, as in to rustle cattle. Rustling was such a problem in the Old West that cowboys often carried guns to deter thieves. Politic. 1. Having good judgment, prudent. 2. Wily and crafty. Always cool-headed, John was very politic in both his business and personal affairs. Tender. 1. To offer something formally as payment. 2. To offer or present something for acceptance. The man tendered his house as payment of his gambling debt. Damp. To suppress or stifle, to extinguish. The teacher's rules and warnings dampen the children's excitement about the field trip. Steep. To immerse something, especially in liquid. True tea connoisseurs never steep their tea for too long. Bolt. 1. A lightning flash. 2. A roll of cloth. 3. A dash or sprint. The tailor measured out a bolt of material for the dress. Prune. To trim or reduce. David should prune the hedges so that they do not grow over the fence into the neighbor's garden. Bent. An inclination for, an attraction towards. The little girl had a natural bent for astronomy, so we bought her a telescope. Booty. Valuable goods taken by force. After successfully attacking the ship, the pirates divided the booty amongst themselves. Parrot. To repeat, to copy, to mimic. Maud had no originality whatsoever and simply parroted whatever her mother said. Recess. 1. A break from work. 2. An alcove in a wall. 3. A secret, isolated place. The urn was displayed in a recess in the living room wall. Badger. To harass, to pester. The woman badgered the waiter for more ice, more butter, more salt, until he stopped coming to her table. Vet. To examine for faults or errors, to appraise. The editors vetted the story carefully before allowing it to be printed. Flip. Casual in a disrespectful or careless way. If I were you, I wouldn't be so flip about preparing for the final exam. Range. 1. To wander. 2. To be found in a certain area or era. The cows ranged all throughout the property during the day and returned to the barn at night. Sanction. 1. A punishment for breaking a certain law or a reward for following it. 2. Official permission given to do something. If the queen has not given her sanction, I'm afraid I cannot allow you to pick roses from her garden. Plastic. Able to be changed or molded. One's beliefs should never be too rigid. It's better that they be plastic, capable of adapting to new circumstances. Foil. Someone whose qualities contrast with and thereby highlights someone else's. The delinquent girl was the foil for her brother's maturity and success. Yoke. 1. To join two things or creatures together. 2. To subjugate. The immigrants demanded higher wages, refusing to let anyone yoke them into virtual slavery. Rail. To rage against, to complain furiously. The irate passenger railed against the airline's terrible customer service. Milk. To extract something. If the wealthy old man is so willing to give you gifts, you should milk the situation for all it's worth. Ferret. 1. To root out, to search for. 2. To worry restlessly. Ferret around in the attic and see if you can find our family photo album. Lumber. To walk about in a hulking, heavy fashion. The giant lumbered about the village, smashing anything he could. Mannered. Artificial or affected in manner. Her mannered speech and demeanor make people distrust her because she seems so fake. Dated. Archaic, old-fashioned. Don't you think that dress is a little dated? Lush. Someone who is frequently drunk. Mr. Smith used to abstain from alcohol, but now he's turning into a lush. Brood. The children of a family. I wish that woman would keep her brood of dirty kids under control. Essay. 1. To attempt or try. 2. To test something. The chef essayed a new recipe for the food critic. Tame. Dull, not risky. Her new work is quite tame when compared to her previous book, which was condemned by religious figures and scientists alike. Ration. 1. To divide into portions of a certain size in order to make something last longer. 2. To impose strict portion control on oneself. We must ration this loaf of bread so that it lasts us for the entire month. Flag. 1. To grow weary or to decrease in strength. 2. To wave or signal. Towards the end of the marathon, Lucy's energy began to flag. List. To tilt or drift to one side. The drunkard listed unsteadily down the sidewalk, nearly stumbling into the street at times. Rifle. To search through and plunder. The hungry teenagers rifled through the fridge, looking for something to eat. Exacting. Demanding precision. The head chef's standards were so exacting that it was hard for her to find acceptable employees. Adept. Someone capable and very skilled. The entrepreneur hired 3 adepts to help her start the company. Wooden. Stiff, unnatural, clumsy. Her movements were so wooden that the director told her she was a failure as an actress. Abstract. 1. To consider theoretically. 2. To remove or take out. The problem with abstracting an idea or concept is that it becomes so impersonal. Fell. Fierce, destructive. The army quailed at the sight of their fell opponents. Canvass. To ask for votes from people. We were out canvassing for 5 hours straight, but we obtained quite a few votes. Moon. To wander dejectedly and aimlessly. The lonely student mooned about the halls, looking for someone to talk to. Prize. To value, to appreciate, to esteem. The blue ribbon winning pig is prized by its owner. Husband. To manage with frugality and prudence. Husband your resources wisely, and you will never lack anything. Mock. Fake, imitation. Many vegetarian dishes involve mock meat made from gluten and tofu. Prompt. To initiate an action. The rash of recent car thefts in my neighborhood prompted me to buy an alarm for my truck. Peer. One's equal. When it came to skill in diving, the captain of the swim team had no peer. Pluck. Courage, boldness. The girl's pluck made her a great ally in a fight. Brook. To permit, to allow. My mother doesn't brook any arguments. We all have to go along with whatever she says. Incense. To anger, to outrage. Margaret was incensed that her sister wore an identical dress to the dance. Pitch. 1. To throw. 2. To set at a certain level or standard. Don't pitch your expectations too high or you will always be disappointed. Plague. To pester or bother. Stop plaguing me with stupid questions and do your work. Table. To put an issue away for discussion at a later date. Why don't we table the issue of finances for the moment and concentrate on the issue of marketing? Fillet. To remove bones from fish. Don't forget to fillet the fish or else Grandma might choke on the bones. Minute. Small, tiny. The radio operator made minute adjustments to the dial in the hopes of improving the reception. Pine. To yearn or long for. The blue parrot sat in its cage, pining for the tropical jungle of its childhood. Stint. To provide only a limited supply. My father will never stint when it comes to buying food for the family. Suffer. To tolerate. The drama coach does not suffer fools gladly and will ridicule anyone whom she deems stupid. Attendant. Accompanying. There are many problems attendant on the use of nuclear power, such as toxic waste. Stock. Conventional. I wish movies would abandon stock characters and come up with original ones. Temper. To moderate, often by mixing with another element. Please temper your harsh judgment with mercy and forgive her for what she has done to you. Couch. To express in a particular way. Her argument was couched in such specialized rhetoric that nobody understood her point. Skirt. To avoid something by going around. A skillful politician will be able to skirt a troublesome issue even when he is confronted with it point blank. Lap. To drink up using one's tongue. Don't lap up your soup, use a spoon instead. Rent. Torn. I can't go to work with this large rent in my blouse. Bald. Bare, exposed, unadorned. Faced with the bald facts, Katie was forced to acknowledge her husband's infidelity. Comb. To search through extensively. The family combed the beach looking for Molly's lost sunglasses. Lame. Weak or disabled. She had a pretty face, but everyone pitied her because she was lame. Retiring. Shy, modest. Don't let his retiring demeanor fool you. He's actually quite an extrovert. Crow. To boast or exclaim over a victory or success. The girl crowed over her rival's misfortune. Celebrated. Highly praised. His skill on the piano was much celebrated in his youth. Ruffle. 1. A disturbance. 2. Lace frill on clothing. The fishermen ignored the faint ruffle on the surface of the water, unaware that the man-eating shark was after them. Ferry. To transport to and fro. One drawback to owning a car is having to ferry your friends about all the time. Beach. To strand something from the water on the shore. Occasionally, the waves will beach a weak whale upon the shore. Lot. 1. The fate assigned to one by fortune. 2. An object used to make a decision at random. Yolanda felt it was her lot in life to experience constant bad luck. Crib. To plagiarize or copy. Don't crib your answers from Jerry. Get them from someone smarter. Nice. Subtle, precise. It takes skill to do well in the GRE because the difference between a right answer and a wrong answer is often very nice. Digit. An appendage such as a finger or toe. After chopping vegetables, he always counts his digits to make sure they're all there. Singular. Special, exceptional. He has a singular talent for catching flies with chopsticks. Pacific. Peaceful, calm. The farmer was of such a pacific temperament that everyone in the town wished him well. Nurse. 1. To nurture. 2. To suckle. Although Samira had forgotten about their conflict, Bill spent several years nursing his resentment. Patent. Obvious, evident. Isn't it patently obvious that Justin doesn't like you anymore?